Yo, what's going on, everybody? This is Nothing But Bangers, aka MBB, aka Bangers, aka I'm back with a huge interview that I did with the first place winner from the Ursiiday weekly tournament. And I got to tell you, like, it was really unique because we haven't really had an interview like this before. And you'll see what I mean when I get to that part of the video. But I wanted to give you a little bit of a recap as to like the current state of the meta for tournaments right now and give you a little update as to, what's going on behind the scenes. So this past weekend, we had a couple of pretty big surprises in the Pocket Legends League tournament, as well as the Ursiiday Pocket Weekly. And there was another tournament that was like 1,300 people that I think the same deck actually won as well, compared when you look at the Ursiiday tournament. So we've had two Weaviles take home big tournaments in the past few days, and suddenly Weavile is a lot more popular. So I wanted to spend some time kind of talking about this, taking a look at the deck list, and of course I've got the interview with the first place winner, so I want to go ahead and talk about that as well. But just to kind of give you a glimpse as to like some of the top performing decks, you can kind of see that there's still a lot of Arceus Dialga, there's some Arceus Carnivis, there's obviously the Rampardos Lucario, but like the one thing that I kind of want to start getting you guys ready for is getting you ready for ranked. And that's kind of like my next big focus in terms of like content, and kind of what I've been trying to work on behind the scenes is kind of trying to visualize how I want my content for ranked to really look like and what I wanted to offer. And again, like the other big surprise this weekend was Gallade and Hitmonlee variants. Some of them played double Hitmonlee, some of them played one Hitmonlee, one Marshadow. Some of them played one Hitmonlee, one Marshat, or excuse me, one Sudowoodo. There was all sorts of different techs that these decks had. But again, it was a really cool weekend for like other decks to really start to, get a little bit more shine. And if you've been watching my channel, I've been pretty high on Gallade for a while now since this new meta has started. So I was really happy to see that, but I really hadn't done too much, talking about this Darkrai and Weavile combination. So let's take a look at this deck list. This is the deck list for the first place finisher. I don't know if it's Stice or Stis or Steese, so I'm just going to go with Stice. That just sounds cool. So Stice was bringing this deck to the Ursiiday tournament, and you'll notice it's just got a breakdown of two Weavile line, two Sneasel, two Weavile, two Darkrai EX, two Cyrus, two Leaf, two Professor's Research, one Mars, one Sabrina, double Pokeball, one Pokemon Communication, one Potion, and two Giant Capes. So you'll notice there's no Giovanni, there's no Rocky Helmet to really fix any damage. Most of this damage is going to be generated via either Darkrai's effect or by using various attacks that these Pokemon have. The Dawn combo is something that a lot of people kind of look at and they immediately gravitate to, but you'll notice that this deck is not playing that Dawn combo, right? Where, hey, if you if it's turn 3 of the game and you went first, right? So turn 3, you evolve your Sneasel into a Weavile, and then you have a Darkrai on your bench. You attach the energy to the Darkrai, and then you don the energy from the benched Darkrai to the active Weavile, and then attack for 70 damage. That's the 90 damage one turn combo that you see with Dawn, and you'll notice that this player chose to just not even play it. So that was pretty interesting, but again, the deck list, I kind of asked them about the deck list as well. You'll see that in the interview here in a second. But they were very happy with these 20 cards. And, a lot of the time, they actually really liked how this deck played. So there weren't a lot of changes that they really wanted to make to the deck. And let's take a look at the matchups that they played. This is a list of their matchups going all the way from pretty much the top 64 cut to their rounds of Swiss, and you'll notice there's a lot of Dialga, a lot of Rampardos, and then a few other rogue decks like you see Mirror Match where they lost to Nanjamo. And then one big thing that a lot of people will be quick to point out is that like, oh, they didn't play their weakness, grass, and like that's obviously a big deal to dodge the grass matchup, your weakness for an entire tournament, but there's also just like not a lot of it out there. And that's kind of where the idea of a meta call comes in, right? It's like, hey, I'm playing this deck because there's not a lot of its weakness. It lines up pretty well into the meta, and hey, there's not really like a lot of hard countering going on. And so like that's kind of the reason why I wouldn't necessarily put too much stock into that statement of, oh, they didn't play their weakness. And the other thing that I would also point out too is if you look at traditional matchup data, I'm pretty sure that the 4 Palkia deck is actually one of the harder matchups for them as well, and they really didn't see that as what either. So, if you're even going to bring up hardest matchups, I would at least bring up both of those decks to kind of illustrate that point. And the one thing that I would push back on as well is that this deck can actually answer a mana fee in a pretty good manner in a lot of different ways, right? Obviously, you got the Sneasel, you got the Weavile, you got the Darkrai Pings. So there's a lot of ways that you can actually answer a mana fee and stop it from snowballing out of control. And that's something that I think is very valuable in decks right now. Then when you talk about the grass matchup, well, yes, obviously Executor, Leafeon, they're definitely going to have a lot of success against this deck. But those decks are kind of like phased out of the meta right now. When you take a look at how they perform against Arceus Dialga, how they perform against even Rampardos, Lucario to a degree, and then obviously the new stuff that we just saw this past weekend, which was a lot of Gallade. So again, like I think it's a good meta call, and I think that they had a really good plan, and they executed it very well. So let's check out this interview. Normally, I have a list of questions that I want to ask, and I really actually didn't even get to the list of questions because as soon as I asked them to do the interview, they were pretty much like ready to just tell me a lot of stuff that was really cool. So just to kind of like dive into some of these points that they brought up, and obviously you can pause and kind of like read through each one of these lines as well if you want. But basically, some of the things that they started pointing out whenever I went ahead and reached out to them is, first of all, they got a lot of help from SSE, Ison, and Slim building this deck. And they were they were a few of the big components to why they decided to put Mars, and that it obviously helped, right? So Mars is a new card that you're seeing in a lot of these Dialga decks and these Arceus decks, and now even these Weavile decks. And it's kind of like a comeback card, right? In a little bit of ways, right? But the idea with Mars is that a lot of Dialga Arceus holds a lot of cards to not get Sabrina. So like basically like you have the option to either play it as kind of like a red card early game, or if they get a KO on one of your EXs, you're able to kind of make it a comeback card against that matchup. And like, what do I mean, or what do they mean by like holding cards? So if you notice, like sometimes like Arceus players will hold a lot of Pokemon in their hand, so that way like whenever they're ready to go off and hit you for like 140 or 130 or 110, they just play their Pokemon all in one turn. And so Mars can be a way to kind of punish that. Other than that, they also mentioned Double Cape and One Posha is for trying to have a good matchup going second versus Dialga Arceus. And then they kind of gave some math there. But other than that, if I had a bad start from them, like starting, or if they had a bad start, starting Shaman or Mew, usually go for sniping. Here, where Sabrina and Mars Fear can come in. Did only one game though. So you'll notice there's a little bit of a language barrier. Obviously, like that's one of the cool parts about like being able to communicate with these people is that like, they're taking time out of their day to obviously respond and give me a little bit of an insight, as well as you guys, an insight to what they're thinking. And so I think what they're trying to say there is that like, if it's a bad start for them, like where, they start something that's not ideal, then, this is where like Sabrina and Mars can kind of like alter a little bit of their gameplay. And so again, you need, they also mentioned that they need 2 Cyrus to win those matchups sometimes, because, there's going to be chip damage that they're able to put down, say with like a Weavile or say with a Sneasel or even a Darkrai Ping. But because you put chip damage and maybe they're not able to heal it all away, those 2 Cyrus can really come into play. But other than that, Mars did wonders versus Gallade and Lucario, Rampardos. And I have a good matchup against them, so lucky there. Also knew a lot of people were going to bring them. So I guess, again, like I'm trying to kind of translate here and kind of like also try to reiterate what I think they're trying to say to us. But basically, the way that I read that is, and the way that I understood that is, they thought that Mars was a really good card against Gallade and against Lucario Rampardos, in that, they have a good matchup with them. So with the prediction that there was going to be a lot of Rampardos Lucario and a lot of Gallade because of the previous few days of success, they decided that Mars was a good card, as well as this deck that they chose to bring. The next part of the conversation, I kind of started to get into a little bit of that. I was like, hey, well, I've let you talk. Let me ask a couple more questions here, so that way we can get a little bit more information for the viewers. So I said, do you think that this deck can repeat the same success, or is it more of a one good run because the meta is currently set? It's pretty set. They said, yeah, a lot of times Gallade just leads Hitmonlee, and they're not running Mars. So I can hold my Pokemon in my hand for an easy win, even if I start something like a Darkrai. So basically, their thing is, hey, I can, it's kind of like what I mentioned a long time ago when I played Fighting Box Pidgeot, is that I liked Red Card because there were times where my opponent saw Hitmonlee or saw Fighting Energy and just didn't bench anything, and then Red Card was able to kind of punish them for like holding so many cards, and sometimes they would even use cards like Professor's Research and then just sit there with 6-7 cards in hand. So again, I think that that's kind of like the same line of thinking, which is really cool. But obviously Mars can be a little bit more dynamic in that mid to late game. And then also it says depend that when they were trying to answer the question about like the different matchups or the different meta, they said if the meta is if you run into a lot of grass decks, especially like Egg Serebii, then probably not. You're probably not going to have a lot of success. But other than that, it's pretty RNG based. Also, you're going to need some luck. But if you get it when you need, then sure, you can definitely win those matchups. So again, they definitely kind of reiterate the idea that hey, if there's not a lot of grass, this deck has a great shot. So that's something that's also really good to pay attention to as well as we start thinking about ranked later on this month. Anyway, so but yeah, the meta was perfect for Weavile. Even though the Dialga Ursiiday is a hard matchup, and there's so many Lucario, Rampardos, and Gallade, it deals fast with Manaphy, and Misty is just kind of a high roll. So again, I kind of want to pause there and kind of like flashback to some of the videos that I've made about Misty. It's like, hey, like you can't necessarily get too caught up in like, oh my gosh, my deck loses to Misty, because like most decks are going to lose to Misty, right? Like if they high roll you with Misty, you're probably just going to lose. There's really like not a lot of the things that you can do to prevent that. So I think that that's something that like is good to hear echoed by other players in the community as well. But again, they definitely mentioned that they did get high rolled with the Misty and Articuno, but it was a little bit too late. But they didn't see that that 4 Palkia matchup often, or actually they didn't see it at all in this tournament. So that was something that also stood out. When I went ahead and started kind of asking a little bit more about this matchup, I said, hey, dealing with Manaphy before it snowballs out of control is such a big deal. And I can see how that helps with Manaphy. It's a little odd because that 4 Palkia deck seems to have good numbers versus Weavile, but that doesn't make sense. So basically what I'm saying there is like, it doesn't make sense because like Darkrai Weavile should be able to take care of the Manaphy. It should be able to. But they kind of mentioned that they played it several times like outside the tournament, and it's not 100% win, but some factors, specifically with the origin form Palkia versions, like that kind of can be a little bit difficult. But again, they think that they're pretty confident in that matchup, even just because of the fact that they do deal with Manaphy pretty early. There's one matchup that they got into with a Manaphy Gyarados, and they said that it was very close. So again, just kind of looking at the rest of this conversation, they were pretty confident that Weavile could beat the Lucario, Rampardos, and the Gallade decks, and so just had a lot of luck kind of running into those in the top cut, and then kind of as opposed to running into those Manaphy origin form Palkia decks, those Manaphy Gyarados decks, and those Misty Palkia decks, and so on. So they were pretty happy with like the way their tournament run lined up, and definitely acknowledge like, hey, yeah, this tournament could have been a lot more difficult if I had ran into some of those Manaphy 4 Palkia decks and so on. But the last part of the conversation, I asked them, hey, are you happy with how the deck played, or would you make any changes? And they said, for the current state of the meta, I'm happy with it. Maybe you could try double Sabrina instead of Potion. So there's some little cookage that you can potentially mess with. Hope, more Dialga Arceus set monsters early, but I don't know. Both Potion and double Sabrina is good. Other than that, versus this meta, I would not change. And if anything, I would change the Potion to Sabrina or not. So like they're definitely leaving that open as an option, but right now they're pretty happy with how the deck played. Anyways, as a few, the last shout out that I asked, I was like, hey, do you have anything else that you want to throw out there? And they just gave another big shout out to Slim and SS Ison in the Pokemon Pocket Discord that helped them build the deck over the past 2.5 weeks. And like, that's really cool because what you can see there is like, hey, it's good to be in active Discords. It's good to be, a contributing member. You never know you know, who you're helping win a tournament, or you know, you may be the person that somebody is helping win a tournament. So there's a lot of cool things there, and like their words of advice here were really cool too. They said, hey, even if you have a bad score in the Ursi Weekly, just go play for fun. Just join for fun if you have the time. It's free to join, and Ursi is a fantastic streamer, and that's part of the reason why they joined the tournament. So again, big shout out to Ursi for putting on events like this, and again, like big shout out to Stice for giving me the opportunity to put this interview out there. I do apologize, it was a little bit later than I wanted to. I wanted to get this video out like 24 hours ago, but again, just kind of getting some things done behind the scenes. But again, I hope you guys enjoy getting like a little bit of insight and a little bit more of an unscripted first place interview. But again, fantastic performance, big congratulations to them, and I can't wait to see, you know, who takes home these big tournaments on the weekend this coming weekend. So stay tuned for more content. Again, if you want to see more content like this, definitely hit that subscribe button, definitely come back to the channel and check out some more videos, and until next time, peace.